Right. We are studying topic of our class is discipleship in our culture. I was just actually thinking as I was preparing for the class yesterday that there's another name we could have done that I thought was pretty good. It was called the Church in Exile. And you might say, well, where did that come from? Go ahead and read that passage.
Okay. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect exiles scattered throughout the province of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood.
To God's elect strangers. The older NIV says strangers. The newer one actually has, I think, a more appropriate word for it. It's exiles. He calls them, who he's talking to, exiles. That's an interesting term. What is an exile? Oh, by the way, before we hold that question for just a second. Before we go any further, for those of you who might just be joining us, the book that we are studying from is A Practical Guide to Culture, and it's by those people right there. Those of you who ordered it last week, the order has been put in. Unfortunately, apparently it has not arrived yet. So I'm hoping next week it will get here and I'll be able to distribute that. They are $13.50 a piece, so you'll need to write out a check to Gail for that. Well, not to Gail, well, to the church. Don't write it to Gail. Write it to the church, the Mandarin Church of Christ, and give it to Gail. So anyway, but that's how that, or I guess you could give it to.
You can just write it on the note and put it in the contribution box.
Okay, that'll work. So anyway, that's just an update, housekeeping on that. If you have not gotten this book, you didn't order it through the group thing, you can still order it through Amazon or something like that. And I don't think it's that much more expensive. Matter of fact, I don't know we got much of a discount at all, to be honest with you, but at least we got them all ordered, at least we get them. So it's an excellent book. It should be titled A Christian's Practical Guide to Culture is what it really should be titled, because it's written from a Christian perspective. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be using it. But excellent book. Highly recommend it. Once again, I'm going to be saying that it is up to y'all to be the teachers of this to others. There's going to be those that are trying to raise children in this culture, that are members of our church and that are members of just people that you know, just family members, others. They need to know these things. They need to understand these things. You need to be we're all called to be teachers. We're all called to spread the word of God, to advance the kingdom of God in this world. We're all servants of God. So please keep that in mind. All right, so what is an exile? Anybody? You want to look it up? Yes.
Generally, it means someone who's been separated from their homeland, usually by force or, whatever, not by choice.
Okay. And Peter calls the Christians that he's writing to exiles, as they were in a situation where they were not welcomed by their culture and they're exiles. And so we very well could be that way. I'm going to read a quote from a book, The Church in Exile. This was written by one of my professors at ACU, James Thompson. And he wrote an excellent book on this. And the quote that I'm going to read from it is this: "The changes which have taken place within the last generation will not make exiles of those whose Christian commitment demands little of them." Make note of that. Nor will it make exiles of churches which speak only to echo what others are already saying. Indeed, religion may remain popular in our culture as long as it exists only to bless the popular values. However, those who are willing to say that God has decisively revealed himself only in Jesus Christ and that our response to him is a matter of ultimate importance will be exiles in a culture which believes that all commitments are equally valid, in a world where we choose alternative lifestyles and each is equally appropriate. Those whose lifestyles are shaped by the one who sacrificed himself for others will be exiles in their own country. In a culture where we are expected to keep ourselves free of binding commitments, those who bind themselves to others in marriage or in the church community will also be exiles. Thus, we face the task of living out our Christian lives, as did the early Christians, as exiles in our own land. Like the exiles of every age, we discover that it is an insecure existence to live as a minority group surrounded by those who think our beliefs are absurd. Now, as appropriate as that is, do you know when this was written? 31 years ago. You think it was written yesterday, don't you? 31 years ago, 1990 was when this was written. Dr. Thompson is still alive. I talked to him a few months ago on the phone. I had some questions to ask him. He was more than willing to talk with me. But anyway, this has been going on for a long time, folks. This is not new. It has come to a head in many ways. Sometimes I think God has been knocking on the door to wake us up. And there's been some wake-up calls in the news as of the past decade or so. But this has been going on for a long time. And the truth be told, it's been going on a lot longer than 30 years. Okay? Who had Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9? Okay, what Tom is about to read is about how God is making a way for his people, Israel, to be able to cope in a land where the surrounding neighbors are not hospitable to godliness. Okay? Remember that. Go ahead.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write on them door frames of your houses and on your gates.
Okay. When you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, does this sound like just talk about godliness at church? No, not at all. This is to be a daily kind of thing. This is to be a lifestyle kind of thing. I picture very much when you walk along the road is seeing things that might help inspire a conversation about God. You know, we call it as teachers, what do we call that? Teachable moments. Teachable moments. We need to look for teachable moments. We need to teach our children to teach their children about teachable moments. Let's see. We need to tell them what they'll be facing, what worldviews that will be popular today. We talked briefly about worldviews last week. We didn't talk enough about it, but let me just go over these worldview questions again. These are just a few of the basic main worldview questions that we face and that we will answer and our children will answer either purposefully, intentionally, or they will just answer them by the way they live, by the way they, act and relate to others. Where did we come from? Where did anything come from? What is a human being? In other words, what's our identity? What is our purpose? How do we know right from wrong? How do we find that? Who says? Who's the arbiter of right and wrong? What's wrong with our world? Now, I doubt you'll find anybody who says there's nothing wrong with the world. What you will find is people who have different answers for the solution. That's what you will find. Okay. What happens when we die? Okay. These are worldview questions, and these determine how we live our lives. Now, let's just go over some of this. Now, I think maybe as Christians, we know the answer to some of these, but let's look at what the competing answers are going to be. What the answers our grandchildren and our children, and possibly even great-grandchildren, depending upon how old you are, okay, what they're going to be hearing, okay? Where did we come from? Well, what are some of the competing answers to that question? Where did we come from? Anybody? Go ahead.
The buck and the mire.
Okay.
The what?
The muck and the mire, the primordial soup. We are nothing but a collection of molecules that have by chance randomly come together. And when we die, those molecules will just go back into the elements, and that will be it. Okay, now that is what I call the atheistic point of view, and that's becoming more and more popular. Okay, there are variations of this that are not Christian that come about. What is a human being? Well, how do we get our identity? Well, lately in the news and so forth, identity comes from your sexual orientation.
Your choice.
Your sexual attraction defines you. The Bible says we're defined by our relationship with God. That we are image bearers, as the scriptures say. We bear the image of God, and we are made in his image. And that is the primary identifying mark of us. What is our purpose? Well, our purpose is to honor God and to live in accordance with his will, to promote his kingdom on this earth and otherwise. Okay? How do we know right from wrong? God has communicated that to us through his word. That's why we study it. There's a standard. How do we know right from wrong? Now, see, that is a really good question for apologetics, for Christian evidences, because most people out there will tell you there really is right or wrong. Matter of fact, they'll come up and say things like, well, how can there be a good God if there's so much evil in the world? That's a popular question out there. Back up a little bit. Well, wait a second. How do you find good and evil?
Yes. How about that?
Exactly. How do you define? What makes you say that this is good and this is evil? Go ahead, brother.
Still, the fact of the matter is, if you really think it through, if there is no God, then there is no absolute good, right and wrong.
That's exactly right.
Might makes right, basically. Which, by the way, 51% majority is essentially might make right.
Yeah, and you will find all different. There are whole books and shelves of philosophy about the answers to these questions. But the ultimate answer is that God determines right and wrong. Okay. Now, that is a really good question to throw back in people's faces. The question of evil is just as bad a question for the atheists as it is for us. Because in all honesty, that question, how can God allow evil? That I tell people that's a good question for Christians and believers in God to discuss, because there's answers to that question. But if you're not a believer in God, you can't even start with that question, because you don't even know how to define good and evil. So what happens when we die? What happens when we die? Well, it is appointed unto man once to die, and then to face the judgment. Yeah, exactly. Now, what happens when we die? According to other competing views, well, go back into the earth and you're, dead all over like Rover, Go ahead.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, even in our belief structure, our body does do that.
Yeah.
Physical body. So we don't disagree on that. It's whether you have, eternity ahead of you.
Well, and there is resurrection. There's resurrection, so now, once again, You and I, we know the answer, hopefully, we know the answers to these questions. We take them for granted. And I've learned as a teacher, that's a danger. That is a danger to take something for granted because, yeah, you and I, most of us in here have been in the church for, most of us have been here, have been in the church for a long time. I'm not going to take the time to do it, but if I could ask how long you've been a Christian, I bet the average number of years would be high in this room. Okay.
You saying we're old fogies? Sorry.
Oh,
You've known the truth for a long time.
know the truth for a long time. Yeah, that's exact. Thank you, Charlotte. Okay. All right, so let's move on here. Those are some worldview questions. Now, let's look at some practical tips or hints because they do get into some practical things in this book. And I started with 2 of them last week and ran out of time. So I'm going to review again. Talk about worldview questions with your children, grandchildren, early and often. Like I said, you can't take it for granted that they know the answer to these questions, right? Explain questions. By the way, if you have something to add, please let it be known and chime in, okay? Explain non-Christian worldviews. Explain these competing worldviews that we just went over. They're out there, and there's others too. When ideas are named, they lose their power. When you name something, secular humanism, what is that? That's the belief that, well, we in and of ourselves are able to handle the problems of this earth. We don't need God. Why God, anyone who brings up God is just using a crutch. Secular humanism, okay? You see it all the time. Now, this is in the context of what we see in the culture, because what you see in the culture assumes that it's right. Nobody is out there teaching secular humanism like this, like we're teaching this. There's no group out there that's doing it. They're doing it on TV. They're doing it in books. They're doing it in college, in academia. Okay, it's being taught, and various other competing worldviews are being taught that way. Okay, and so we need to counter those things. And by the way, last week we started talking about college. Okay, and I didn't really want to get off into that. The point I wanted to make from college is really the point that Urban made, is that when we send our kids off to college. All right, even whether they go to a Christian school or whether they go to a state school, and there is a difference, but if they go to a state school, they will find what they're looking for. We need to direct them to find the right things, to look for the right things, okay, to look for support of their Christian faith rather than go against that. There are exceptions to this, but if you go to a state school, you're going to need to actively look for those that are going to help support you in your faith. They're going to need to do that, because I doubt many of the professors will do that. As a matter of fact, many of the professors, especially like in philosophy and things like that, or biology, they will teach a competing worldview, and actively so. Okay. Some of them are very much against Christianity. So, and I'm not saying everybody, there are exceptions to that, but, we just have to watch out for it. Okay. So, explain non-Christian worldviews. When ideas are named, they lose their power. Don't use the TV as a babysitter. Don't use the TV as a baby, especially if you're not 100% sure of what they're watching. Okay, you're watching something, sometimes even G movies. I'm not talking about sex and violence. Okay, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the worldview that's being taught. Okay, I'm talking about the idea that God created us in his image and we're valuable for that purpose. Human beings are. And we need to treat each other with dignity because of that. And there are many things that come out from that. Don't use the TV as a babysitter. Actually, you can use TV to help teach some of this stuff, because when something comes up that's against the Bible, a worldview that says, that it's okay to do this or that. It's okay to have sex outside of a marriage relationship between consenting adults. We can address that with our children and help them to see that that is not okay. Yes.
Anymore, it's not just the television shows, it's the commercials as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, the commercials too.
Be watching the show.
Oh, yeah, commercials.
Oh, if you buy this product, you will live the high life. And what is the high life? What is fulfillment in life? It is having a girl on each arm, and being able to, and this drink will get you that. And so there's two things. Number one, the product is not going to get what it's promising, and what it's promising is not what you want. So there's two things that you need to go there. And so advertisement, especially, thank you very much. Let's see here. Number 3, strongly encourage kids to read good books. Now, here's one. Now, I'm going to have some suggestions on this. I don't have a list of books, okay? You're going to have to use some discernment on that. There's probably some good Christian book lists for kids and age appropriate. But first of all, I do want to say, this is a quote in here, leaders are readers and readers are leaders. I am a math teacher, okay? I teach math. But I will say this, even though I'm a math teacher, I will just tell you straight up, reading is more important. Being able to read is more important than being able to do math. Now, I'm not saying math isn't important. I teach math, okay? But I'm just saying someone who can't read and can do math will do much worse in life than someone who can read and has a hard time with math, okay? Because look, how did God decide to communicate with us?
His word.
His word. It's written down. It's words on a page. We need to be able to read them. Okay, so we can start there. Reading is very important. My dad, he helped me not with the mechanics of it. I did learn that in school, okay, the mechanics of how to read. What he did, he made me want to read, because at nighttime he'd open the book and he would read to me, and I was like, man, that's amazing. Before I could read myself, he read to me, made me want to do it. I remember Treasure Island. Before I could read, he read that to me. There's some things. Reading helps kids to be able to think for themselves. It challenges their thinking. Written words are how God has chosen to communicate his will to us today. Good books help teach kids how to think. And let me tell you something. That is so important in our culture, because people will tell your kids what to think.
Brother Troy,
Yes, please.
What you just said about reading and math, and you need to be able to read, and you know what I'm trying to say. It's a lot like musical instruments and music in the church. So if you know how to sing without that guitar or without that piano, you can sing with the piano and the guitar. But if you can't, then when you go somewhere where they don't have the musical instruments, you're going to be lost. You won't be able to sing without your,
I heard someone out in Texas, one of the youth ministers, the campus minister out there, said that when he was in school, he said they wanted to find someone who knew music. Find someone in the Church of Christ.
Yep.
No, really, because they don't use instruments, so they got to know it.
Yep.
And so if you can find someone who knows music, find someone in the Church of Christ.
But that's okay.
What's that?
I said, they didn't know me, but that's
They didn't know you, yeah. Well, anyway, but let's see. Strongly see. Yeah. Okay. Now, here's the thing. You might say, well, they got the internet. Okay. First of all, you never know what's going to come up on the internet. Google, you go to Google and go to page Google. And page Google, you don't know what's on page Google, You go to a book, you go page 1, 2, 3. It's sequential. It's logical. Okay. Books, go from one page to the next. The internet's just kind of all over the place. You never know what's going to pop up. So books are important. Helps them to see the principle of cause and effect. That's so important for young people. It's important for us too. What it means is that when I do things, it has consequences. There are consequences to our actions. Now, you may be thinking, well, this is really basic stuff, Troy. Yeah, it's basic maybe to us, but we need to help them to see that. Okay. Give them good books. You got grandchildren? Give them some good books. Find a good book. Don't just give it to them, though. Read it yourself and say, my favorite part is on page such and such, or chapter 8. My favorite part. Help them to understand why. Be engaged with them. Don't just give them books. Read it yourself. Excitedly tell them about your favorite part. Okay? All right. Number 4, discuss ideas whenever God gives you opportunity to do so. Now, this overlaps some of the other stuff. Song lyrics are good. Well, not all song lyrics are good. Okay. All right. But song lyrics are good opportunities to speak up and to teach something. Nancy mentioned commercials. That's, what is fulfillment? What is going to give us a happy life? The commercials have a definition for that, and they just assume it. They don't say, this is what will give you a happy life. They just put a picture up there and assume that's going to teach you, this is what will give you a happy life. Okay? Pause that movie and discuss the good guys and the bad guys. Because a lot of times children think in black and white. Sometimes we think in black and white. And we think, well, the good guy did that, so it must be okay. No, not always. James Bond was the good guy in his movies, right? You pull for him, did he always do things that were right? No, not at all. And so, anyway, just some thought. All right, number 5, and this is probably one of the ones I want to put a star by here. Ask good questions. Ask good questions. I'll tell you, as an educator, it is more important to ask the right questions than it is to swallow somebody else's answer to their question. Okay, asking good questions is very important. All right, what do you mean by that? That's one of the questions. What do you mean by that? Someone says, are you a homophobe? What do you mean by that? Make them define their terms. And then address it from there. Go ahead, brother.
I was going to just say, a good question will get people to think instead of just respond.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Critical. When I teach, I try to ask critical thinking questions. Make them think. And if they ask a really good question that shows insight, I'll give them candy for that too. The battle of ideas begins with the battle for definitions. Now think about that for a second. The battle for ideas begins with the battle for definitions. Someone just comes up and says, are you for marriage equality? That assumes some things, doesn't it? Well, what is marriage? You got to start somewhere. What is marriage? What's the definition of marriage? Okay. So, just things like that. Ideas thrown about casually. Things that we just take for granted. What is freedom? Does that mean you can do anything you want? Freedom. Anything you want, right? Freedom of speech. I can say anything I want. In a crowded theater, I can yell fire. Can I do that? Is that freedom of speech? No. Truth. Today, truth can be, it's what you think is right is your truth, and what I think is right is my truth. And, that's kind of what people think today. Go ahead.
You know, I think it's important we ask our children, especially at a young age, do you know what you're singing? Do you know what you're saying? When I was younger, when we were at Middleburg, I listened to country music. And Andrew was always with me, you know, wants to be with his dad and so on and so forth. And I was very surprised to hear that my son likes his women a little on the trashy side. And
Some songs
the
that,
song
yeah,
that was playing
yeah.
at that time. And I asked him, I said,
What does that mean?
you know what that means, Andrew? He goes, no, it's just, you know, I'm just singing the song. So, you know, one, I felt bad for myself because I allowed that, you know, in the car with my son, because I didn't need it either. But I had to make sure that I asked him about that and then explained to him what that meant. And that's why we don't say that. You know, there's no need for that. So you can't just ask the questions. You got to give them answers too.
Well,
Of what's right.
yes, exactly. And that is a picture of what I'm trying to get to. You know, it is more important for us to do that than it is to try to censor them, because there's really no way to censor them from everything that they're going to get to. People try to homeschool their kids. And you know, there are advantages and disadvantages. There are advantages and disadvantages to that, so to speak, but they're not going to be able to shelter their kids forever. They're going to get out of the house someday. They're going to see what's out there, and are they going to know how to interpret it? Are they going to know that they don't really want a trashy woman? You know, go ahead.
Yeah, I know Tom is the only one who's ever made a mistake in his parenting, so, but I wanted to say this anyway. You're going to make mistakes. That's not the point. The point is to address them, right? So Tom made probably a fairly minor mistake that could have blown out of proportion, but he didn't just let it go. So we got to as adults, we need to recognize our mistakes and deal with them.
And thank you for bringing that up, because none of the things that we're going over here today, I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty for how they brought their children up, okay, or how they didn't. What I am trying to do is help us to see what we can do now. Maybe not even for our own children, but maybe for our grandchildren, or maybe for the neighbor next door, or maybe for the person, your best friend's kid. You know, I mean, what things like that, that helps. It helps us to see. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say before you said that I mean, just sit here for my young life with my kids, who many of you know, just sitting here just wrapping my brain around it. It's simply that discipleship is a daily event, a daily responsibility that we have, period. My kids grew up in the church. They're young adults now. And I know what I did and did not do and what I can't try to do going forward, but it's, like you just said, it's not just for my kids, it's in general. It's our relatives, our friends. It's just discipleship in itself is in the culture is needed every day.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter what.
What she said. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I've had some great examples in my life who they also had, and a lot of, again, my kids grew up in this particular church building, I'll say, but at home as well, and I'm just sitting here like, wow, because where they are today, it's not where I would have thought they would have been, considering how we raised them. And I say we, meaning the church and my household, raised them. Where they are today, it's not where I would have thought, but I'm sitting here looking at, I think it's, what is it? The Bible verse training for kids, your kids the way they should go. And when they're old, they want to depart from me. Okay, I'm waiting on them to get old. Because I'm like, oh boy. But I mean, I'm old too, and I'm just saying that they alternative. But it's just, I know they know what's right, and they were taught what's right. So one thing.
I'm just trying to see what we can do better to help stop this cycle. Okay, go ahead, Rod.
Amen. Just to piggyback on Tracy there, we need to look at our own lives even. It's a Christian walk. it's a lifetime. You know, we all have ups and downs. And I firmly believe, and I know Tracy's children very well, you ingrain the right things when they're younger, I think the majority will come back. They may not all, but I think the majority will. But that's all you can do. But I remember my father-in-law, Collier, a lot of you knew, you know, when we started having children, he and I would talk sometimes, and he'd say, you know, Richard, when they become 18, 19, 20, and they go out of the house, they're not your responsibility from that standpoint anymore. You've done all you can do, and all you can do is hope and pray for them. But he said, give them time. And, you know, it's a walk, you know, I mean, it's, and a lot's going to happen between now and the end of our life, into their lifetime, our lifetimes as well. You just never give up. But if you laid the foundation, you're on, excuse me, you've got a good start to get them to that point. And beyond that, there's not much else we can do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'd like to pick up on what Richard said. We are all walking a road. It's the road of life. And you know, I'm a gerontologist. I like to talk about old people. I had the strangest experience this last week that I've never had before in my life. I was on the road between 13 and Switzerland and came across Julington Creek and coming up on the old St. Augustine. But I noticed a car in front of me swerving from one side to the other. And I slowed down and brought back a little bit. And I noticed that this was being driven by an old woman. And when she got up to old St. Augustine, she stopped and opened her door and got out and started to walk back and couldn't. She fell against her car. So I put my emergency lights on and told John to sit still and I'd be back in a minute. And so I helped her get back in her car, and I knew from my early nursing days that she either had a stroke or she was in a panic attack or both. And she was telling me, I want to go home, I want to go home. And she says, what is this road? So I knew she was in real panic. She wanted to go home and she didn't know how. And so I told her, I says, I'll help you get home. But I said, you can't drive anymore. So I tried being reasonable with her for a while. I was getting nowhere. She was going deeper into panic. And I just stopped and I said, you know, God loves you. You're going to be okay. He takes care of his children. And I kept talking to her. I talked her down, guys. And I didn't teach her the plan of salvation. But I talked to her about God's love, and I saw a miracle happen. And I thought, how many times do we walk life's road and try to take the reasonable road? When if we just shut up and talk about the love of God, I think old people maybe they're more receptive than me. They might have said, you know, lady, you're crazy. She might have too, but I can tell you, it has had such an impact on me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. You know, the same things that I'm talking about that we need to share with young people are good for us. You know, these same things are good for us. It's not like we're above them. Go ahead.
Well, the passage we read in Deuteronomy starts with us. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments I give you today. And then it says, impress them on your children.
Yes.
And then do all these things as you go. It starts with us, and live our lives that way. Yes. And change yourself and walk your walk, and then impress it on your children. Prepare them for the times that are going to have these things pull against them.
I got a couple more.
Put your own mask on the airplane before you put someone else's.
It really is.
Help someone else.
Yes.
So you've helped yourself.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's exactly true. I was reading a leadership book that I don't know if I brought it with me anyway, this past weekend. And it said that real change begins with the leader. And when I say not how the leader interacts with the people, but how the leader deals with himself. So leadership begins, you're going to help influence someone else. You better start with yourself. It's kind of what Jesus said, get the plank out of your own eye, or you try to get we got to start with ourselves first. So thank y'all for sharing that. That's very good. Very good. Okay. How do you know that's true? Someone asserts something. Identify unsubstantiated assertions. Of course, it goes both ways now. People can ask us, well, how do you know that's true? Well, then that will give us an opportunity to answer. That's a good thing. This will help, these questions will help us and our children and our children's children, help them to identify when people don't really know what they're talking about. Oh, but the Bible, isn't it filled with so many contradictions? What? Really? Where are they? Well, I don't know, but I mean, I've just heard, they're just, well, show me a few. Well, no, so I mean, it's just a few questions to ask to help people think and help people see. These are not so we can win arguments. These are so we can help people see the truth. We see the difference there? I've heard about Christian apologists, Christian people who talk about Christian evidences. And I'll just be honest with you, Christianity is logical, okay? Christianity is logical. It makes good sense. Amen. Okay? But it can be presented in such a way that turns people off. You can beat people over the head with it, win an argument, but turn them off totally. If people don't feel comfortable with what conversation that you've had, they're not going to listen to you no matter how logical it sounds. It's just that way. And I've heard story after story about people who left Christianity, not because it didn't sound right, but because the person who was presenting it were just interested in winning an argument. We got to love people. What was Jesus about? He wasn't about winning arguments. He was about loving people. Do we love people? If we love people, then we can lovingly address these ideas. In one of Peter's letters, it eludes me right now. Be ready always to give answer to anyone that would ask reason for the hope that you have, but do so how? With gentleness and respect, it says. With gentleness and respect. So we have to be that way, okay? All right. Here's another one. This is the last question I've got. We'll close out. I'm sorry, who's got a question?
I'm giving you 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes, okay. All right, here's one. What if, someone explains their reason why they don't believe in God or they're not following God or whatever. You say, what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong? What are the consequences of being wrong in this instance? Pascal's wager. You ever heard of Pascal's wager before? Pascal's wager. Pascal says, it's a kind of a cynical way to look at it. And us who are people of faith probably would not look at it this way. But we could present it to someone who didn't have the eyes of faith. Okay? And here's what Pascal wager says. Look, if I'm wrong here, I haven't lost anything. Okay? But if you're wrong, you've lost everything. Okay? Go ahead.
Well, one other thing is, when you don't know, don't just make up an answer. Just say, I don't know. Let me look it up.
I'll get back with you. Yeah, that's good. That's excellent. All right. There was another example of this back in the 1970s. There were advocates of the no-fault divorce law. Okay? It ended up winning out, I think. But the advocates said that the children would be better off with this because if the parents are happier, the children should be happier. Was that right? No. Children suffered greatly when parents divorced. That happens. The children are affected by that, no matter which way you look at it. Okay? And so what if you're wrong? What are the effects if you're wrong? We need to look and see what are the consequences of ideas. All right. I think that was the last bell. So next week, we're going to look at human identity, what it means to be human. what our society is saying that it means and what God says it means. And we'll go on from there. We are getting to the cultural issues of the day. We're going to look at, pornography. Well, we're not going to look at pornography. We're going to discuss it. We're going. I'm out right. We're not going to. We're going to look at things like cultural race relations, affluence and consumerism, sexual identity, all those things. We're going to look at all those things. They're coming up, and we're going to look at them from a biblical perspective. So anyway, all right, you're dismissed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you, Troy.
Need to give to you. I'm studying Esther. I have this paragraph that I thought